Coming in at number 10, we have SCP-1000. This SCP just so happens to be the big furry guy in the woods that no one can catch on camera. Yes, this SCP is also the hide-and-seek champion himself. It's Bigfoot. It only makes sense that the missing link Ape Man Sneak Master is part of the SCP Foundation. He is a mythical beast that the SCP Foundation has most likely been trying to get their hands on for years. Based on the SCP's knowledge of this big ape, it seems that it clocks in at around 10 feet tall, and they can be somewhere between 200 and 600 pounds. Man, a 600-pound ape dude that is 10 feet tall? That guy could be drafted to any sports team he ever wanted, no question. His bench press is probably ridiculous. Something that the SCP Foundation has found out about this version of Bigfoot is that it carries with it a very deadly virus that can lead to the end of life as we know it. So if you ever see a Bigfoot just walking around in the wild, maybe just leave him alone, because he might give you a sickness that could end mankind. Coming in at number 9, we have SCP-994. What's that in the sky? Is it a bird? Is it a plane? No, it's an unidentified flying object. Yes, this SCP is based on the classic UFO, and didn't the Pentagon just release footage of a UFO to the public and nothing happened? Like, everyone saw that, right? They were like, hey, there was something flying in the sky and we could not identify it. That's how you know the world is messed up right now. The government was like, aliens are real, and nobody cared. Well, what can I say about this SCP that you don't already know from the countless stories about UFOs? They often look like flying saucers, they move at speeds that don't make any sense, and they defy the laws of physics. There's probably a bunch of little green or gray dudes in there who want to put probes in our butts for unknown reasons. That's the real mystery here. Why do aliens want to put stuff up our butts? Coming in at number 8, we have SCP-1981. Why not an SCP that is a good old presidential speech? I mean, who doesn't like to go back through time and watch old presidential speeches? That sounds like so much fun. For those of you who are not aware, SCP-1981 happens to be a VHS tape of Ronald Reagan's speech about the threat of Russia encroaching on the US in 1983. This was a pivotal moment for the US in arming itself with nuclear arms to stand strong against Russia. But there is something very different about this recording. A minute and 10 seconds into the recording, the president will start to give a speech that has never been seen before. If you rewind the tape and play it again, the speech will once again change topics. As the video continues, lacerations will start to appear on the president's face, and those lacerations will continue to get worse. There's also been a dark hooded figure spotted in some of the viewings. This tape was found at the Ronald Reagan Presidential Museum by one of the librarians. And even though this is just a story from the SCP Foundation, some people on the internet have claimed that this librarian is a real person, which might give some credit to the tape being real. Ooh. Coming in at number 7, we have SCP-096. The SCP known as Shy Guy. This SCP has a long, pale body. He's about 8 feet tall, and he hates when people look at him. If you are unlucky enough to spot this guy in the flesh, then you better start running, because this SCP will stop at nothing to kill you. Now, I have thrown him on this list because there are numerous stories online of Shy Guy sightings, which doesn't really make any sense because he's supposed to kill you if you see him, but I'll read one out to you. This story was uploaded to Reddit, and it was about a girl walking home late at night. She heard crying coming from down an alley. She was concerned about what could be going on, but she also wasn't about to walk down a dark alley late at night. She then saw a tall, hairless figure step out from behind a dumpster. It had a horrific, deformed face with an extended jaw, and it started to move towards her quickly. She ran away, and a car passed by filled with people. I guess this grabbed SCP-096's attention because he started chasing after the car and left the woman to run away home to have nightmares for the rest of her life. Coming in at number 6, we have SCP-087. This SCP is just a set of glowing stairs. Well, that can't be that spooky. Well, the steps that make up this SCP can lead to a whole bunch of strange places. Some say the steps lead to a doorway to another dimension. Others have said that the steps can lead down to hell. This SCP is only a set of 13 steps. Of course, it has to be the number 13. Well, here's the thing. Apparently, this SCP can move wherever it wants to go. It can disappear and reappear instantaneously. It can change old steps into itself and create steps out of thin air. There are plenty of reports on the internet of people saying they saw a set of glowing stairs appear, but they were too scared to walk up them. I think that's a good choice. No need to follow the devil mystery steps, that's for sure. Coming in at number 5, we have the Virgin Mary. If the Virgin Mary is real and all-powerful, she would for sure be someone the SCP Foundation would be interested in. See, they don't only go for evil, scary things. There are a bunch of cute and cuddly SCPs, as well as holy, righteous ones. And to back up the Virgin Mary's existence outside of the Bible, there is the story of the miracle of the sun. Apparently, back in 1917, 2019, there were 3 kids in Portugal that were getting weekly visits from the Virgin Mary herself. Everyone thought that these kids were probably lying until they told everyone that the Virgin Mary would come back the following week and perform a miracle for everyone to see. Over 100,000 people showed up to see this miracle happen, and apparently the sun started spinning in the sky and changing colors. This has never been explained. Coming in at number 4, we have Dobby the house elf. If you're a Harry Potter fan, then you know all about Dobby and his involvement in the Harry Potter universe. And if you're a fan of the SCP Foundation, you will know all about how they love to find and catalog anything supernatural. And if you were anywhere on the internet in 2019, you probably saw this video.
It's the creepy video that freaked everyone out.
I'm honestly just kind of scared.
The creature was captured back in June on a motion sensor camera outside a home in La Junta, Colorado.
No one has any idea what was caught on this camera. Dobby was just a speculation, but whatever this thing was, it didn't look like anything that we have seen before, and I wouldn't be surprised if it was something with elf powers. I can't say that this has any direct relation with any SCP that has already been cataloged in the Foundation, but if there was an SCP Foundation in real life, they would be hot on the trail of this little dude when this video came out. Coming in at number 3, we have skinwalkers. Shapeshifters come in all shapes and sizes. Get what I did there? You guys get that joke? Pretty good joke. I like that joke. But back to my point. Shapeshifters have both existed in the SCP Foundation and in several of our mythology throughout history. Come to think of it, the SCP Foundation is just another type of mythology. But skinwalkers are some of my favorite. They are a Navajo legend of people who could take the form of animals and sometimes even other people. Most famously, they would transform into werewolves. Very spooky. I think out of all the things in the SCP Foundation that could possibly exist in real life, this one could be real because we would never know if they were ever around us because they could constantly change their shape. So I could be one, you don't even know. Coming in at number 2, we have SCP-343. This SCP has also been called God, the creator of everything we know and everything we can interact with. This SCP is not like the God from the Bible who wants you to pray to him. No, this God is neither good nor evil. He only exists. He has created all for a reason that is far beyond our comprehension. There have been plenty of stories of people saying that they have talked to God outside of Holy Scripture. I mean, the local crazy guy probably says that he talks to God all the time, but what if he's right? What if all these people are talking to God and he does exist in our reality? That's a little spooky to think about, but also makes me a little jealous. Like, why isn't God talking to me? What, am I not pretty enough? Coming in at number 1, we have the Scarlet King. Now, the Scarlet King has never been spotted, but he has been spoken of in other ways. The Scarlet King is a being that is beyond our comprehension, that exists on a higher plane than we do. He has the ability to cross between dimensions, and all forms of lower God fear this entity like the plague, which he is responsible for. So basically, anything bad that has ever happened in the world, this guy is responsible for that. You stub your toe, the Scarlet King did that. You lose your wallet, the Scarlet King did that. An asteroid crashes into the Earth and ends humanity, the Scarlet King did that. Basically, this guy's the devil. So anytime there's been something written in scripture of any religion about the root of all evil, you can go back to this guy. So whether or not you think this guy exists depends on what your belief system is. But he's been lingering around for a long time.
Coming in at number 10, we have SCP-1591. So SCP-1591 is a big, beautiful, levitating glass star sculpture. It seems that at the core of the sculpture, there is glass in the shape of a star weighing around 12 kilos. This in turn is surrounded by further coloured glass panels weighing 12 kilos each. It's a heavy enough star. Here's a picture for those of you struggling to visualise, and really a picture is all you want here because you actually couldn't look at this SCP directly. It seems that SCP-1591 is kept in a room with 30 high-intensity spotlights pointed right at it. These spotlights need to be replaced monthly. Why? Well, SCP-151 produces a light of its own, which increases in brightness and intensity over time, especially in dark environments. When its light shines on a solid object, it at first becomes transparent and then slowly fades away, hence why the spotlight needs replacing as they slowly break down and stop working. Now, if a person is directly exposed to the light, they will lose the ability to speak and will try and run away. Unfortunately though, the light will destroy them, eventually making them disappear. It seems that SCP-1591's power was increased when the site was bombed in the World War. It seems that as time goes on, the brightness of the lights used to quell 1591 needs to increase. For example, if a 40 watt bulb contained it a week ago, by now it will need a 60 watt, so on and so forth. Each month when the spotlights are replaced, they have to get brighter. Now this SCP can only be stopped by bright lights, but eventually we'll run out of lights bright enough. When we do, it will start evaporating things on Earth, everything around it. I guess our only option is to take it to the sun. Okay. I'm a drama girl, so I will absolutely bite. I love the concept behind SCP-701, but it's deadly. Information coming here at number 9. SCP-701 is a 5-act play named The Hanged King's Tragedy. There are multiple copies of the play on lockdown in an anonymous storage site in the SCP Foundation. The observed behavior surrounding SCP-701 is as follows. A group of people decide to do a play, The Hanged King's Tragedy, and as they start rehearsing it, they notice that the content changes every time they meet up, but they don't really realize it, just something weird's going on. As the play begins for its opening night, it's a sellout, a mysterious figure, SCP-701-1, appears on the stage at the end of Act 1. Now the figure is a tall humanoid dressed in black with a hood over its head. The audience noticed, but the cast do not. The audience obviously think it's part of the play, and they're enjoying it. He then continues to appear at intervals before officially coming on stage as the Hanged King during Act 5. Under his gaze, the cast then begin to kill themselves on stage until they're all dead. This is when the audience realize that actually this is no play. Riots break out in the audience, and if any audience member manages to leave, they do so in a daze, committing random acts of violence until they're killed or intercepted by members of the SCP Foundation. If audience members survive and are treated, they're often psychotic for the rest of their life. Some may have no memory of the incident. The reason this SCP could end the world lays in the fact that a VHS and DVD of the performance exists. Anyone who watches it would be prone to hateful and violent outbursts. One play that I don't think I'd enjoy. Coming into number 8, we have SCP-173. The sculpture. This SCP is all of your weeping angel nightmares come true, although we all do have to enjoy the rhyme of saying SCP-173. Absolutely none of us wants to be around this super creep though, I'm telling you. SCP-173 is on lockdown in a sealed container in Unit 19 of the SCP Foundation. The SCP itself has been known as the art piece, as it looks like some kind of ghoulish contemporary art sculpture from hell. Before we talk about the main concern with the SCP, I'd just like to highlight that it seems to seep feces and blood, which is pretty damn unsanitary. Aside from that though, like with the weeping angels in Doctor Who, you basically never ever want to close your eyes around it. Why? Because if you do, it will come closer and closer to you, and when it does finally get to you, it will snap your neck at the base of your skull. It's a killer, so no blinking. The SCP-173 will not stop until everyone who has ever blinked in its presence is dead. So next up, we kind of basically have the exact opposite of SCP-173 at number 7. We have SCP-096. So, I'm not going to show you a picture of SCP-096. Instead, you can look at me. You'll find out why. Often referred to as the Shy Guy, SCP-096 will get you. I guess they all get you in the end, don't they? SCP-096 is kept in a locked steel cube and is checked up weekly for cracks and holes. There can be absolutely no CCTV or video surveillance of any kind when it comes to SCP-096. Any images of this SCP must be destroyed. You can't even draw it. Why? SCP-096 is a humanoid-looking creature with long limbs. It has blank, pale eyes, and its jaw can open 4 times wider than that of a normal human. Unlike with SCP-173, you can't look at it, ever. If you do look at it, it will freak out and kill you. Exactly how it kills you is classified. SCP-096 is noted for freaking out, crying, screaming, and becoming crazed when people look at it. Similarly, if a picture or a recording is taken, it will go crazy and kill. It seems that even looking at a photo or video of this SCP can kill you too. Exactly how? Once again, I don't know. How could it destroy the world? Well, if enough people saw it, hello, dead. Coming into number 6, we have SCP-1048. Okay, but like an SCP that looks like a teddy bear. I mean, that absolutely can't be good news, can it? And no, it isn't. SCP-1048 at first seems like a lovable teddy. Cute. It can move of its own accord, communicate through cutesy gestures, and loves hugs. Or so it seems. But it is all a ruse. SCP-1048 will often hug people's legs and draw childlike pictures and give them as gifts. It will even dance and jump, anything to make someone like it. But make no mistake, a lot like people who try hard in life, SCP-1048 is pure evil. Something the SCP Foundation discovered the hard way. On one occasion, the SCP was observed having entirely replicated itself out of metal scraps. It seems that SCP-1048 has the ability to replicate using any given material, and for this reason, no teddy bears are allowed in the SCP Foundation whatsoever. Prior to the ear incident, this SCP was free to roam its holding site, but following the nightmare, the Foundation realized its true intentions. Oh, what was the ear incident? Let me tell you. It seems that SCP-1048 replicated itself out of human ears, removing the ears of all of the people around it within a 10-meter radius. A teddy bear made of ears. On one occasion, it appears that the SCP was able to abort a pregnant staff member's baby as it began replicating itself with baby parts. Honestly, a world filled with SCP teddy bears that pretend to be cuddly but then use deception and murder in order to replicate, honestly, it sounds like a dangerous world to me. Coming into number 5, we have SCP-1471. SCP-1471 will wreak havoc with your mobile devices. It's a free app usually named Mallow or version 1.00 in app stores. Now there's no listed developer and somehow it's able to bypass approval. Once the app has been downloaded, users won't see any icon or shortcut and they will not be able to delete it. They're doomed. The SCP will then begin sending images to the phone every 3 to 6 hours. The image will contain SCP-1471-A, a humanoid with a goat-like skull with black hair. In the first 24 hours, the images will show the figure at locations frequented by the individual who downloaded the app. In the following 24 hours, the SCP will show up at places recently visited by the individual. After 72 hours, the individual will receive real-time images of SCP-1471-A within close proximity to them. Those who have had the app for 90 hours or more will begin to visualize SCP-1471-A within their peripheral vision, or even their reflections, or both. From then on in, it's a downward spiral. Individuals will actually see the SCP, who will try and communicate with them in a language that they don't understand. So, how could this end the world? Well, almost everyone has a phone, and this SCP will send people mad thinking they're seeing a skull with hair and crazy eyes. While this SCP has never been reported to have killed anyone, with people losing their minds around it, it would be hazardous to mental health and productivity. People wouldn't get any work done in a best case scenario. In a worst case, they would cause accidents or perhaps even try and gouge out their own eyes, which, again, infections. Nightmare. Puss. This SCP will send you insane at number 4. We have SCP-055. This SCP is literally unknowable. It's unknowable by definition. Whatever it is, it makes humans forget about it. Information about it just leaks out of humans' brains. It's a self-keeping secret. It is placed at Site 19, although how the facility was built, we don't actually know. All we know is that Site 19 is 5 by 5.2.5 in meters. What am I going to do with this information? Like, nothing. We don't know what's in this space, and those who go on to investigate it forget. Research has been conducted on those who have been exposed to the SCP, and it seems that the only way of knowing it is by a series of yes-no answers. Now the loophole here is that while you can't know what it is or say what it is, you can know what it isn't. It seems one person question was asked if it was a sphere, to which they said no, but afterwards they didn't know what they were being asked, so not a sphere. Good. Great. What is it? Well, we don't know. To me, this makes me worried because it means we have no idea what it's up to. It could absolutely be plotting to end the world, and knowing the SCP Foundation, it probably is. Shall we start with a picture at number 3 to get the ball rolling? Sure, here it is. This is SCP-610, and it's an infection that causes serious and grotesque mutation. Hip hip hurrah, and we're back to pus again. Exposure to SCP-610 at first leads individuals to develop an itchy rash along with skin sensitivity. The rash will turn into heavy lesions and areas of what look like fresh scar tissue. These scar tissue wounds will then consume the whole body, and the process gets even quicker in warm conditions. It can take anywhere from 5 minutes in hot conditions to 5 hours in cold conditions, and it can absolutely destroy a person. The infected then no longer resembles a person and starts functioning at very high speed. The infected skin will start to grow rapidly and move of its own accord, with limbs becoming long and then branching out like roots, forming other fleshy limbs. Blah. Without containment, they will continue to grow, and any living organism who touches it will become infected too. Infection is spread by touch and sometimes even spores in the air. The infection was first noted in Siberia, and while it has been contained, it hasn't been destroyed. The areas infected continue to be so, and they are protected created by SCP under the guise of military operations. If the containment was breached, then this infection could absolutely destroy the world. Coming into number 2, we have SCP-1548. Well, to me, this really is the baddie to end all baddies, except our number 1, of course. SCP-1548 is cosmic, and it wants us dead. SCP-1548 is a living star, an evil solar system moving towards us at breakneck speed. It seems this SCP was first discovered in the 1970s, with astronomers thinking it was simply another star, until it started moving towards us at increasing speed. Oh, and it's speaking to us via radio signals. It's a sentient star. Hurrah! So, what's it saying? That it wants to destroy all life in its path and it finds us pathetic. Good! Oh, and it also knows we're watching it too. How will it destroy us? Well, it seems it will steal us from our sun's orbit and then gobble us up in its fiery mouth. How long until it reaches us? Well, that's classified. Finally, coming into number 1 when you thought it couldn't get any worse. It does. It's the Scarlet King. Ah, the original SCP, or the original evil. The Scarlet King was originally named as SCP-001 until the SCP Foundation realized that actually he cannot be categorized as he is malice itself. Let me explain. It seems that the Scarlet King is a creature, to quote Jack Finch, whose sole demonic occupation is to usher in Armageddon and the end of all creation. Sure. The Scarlet King is the most malevolent entity in the universe and was born alongside the Tree of Knowledge, or so they say. The Scarlet King is as old as knowledge itself, and it seems that he's the overlord of darkness itself too. So basically, he's the devil. The actual devil. It's said that the Scarlet King is an elder god who has the power to conquer and destroy entire worlds, let alone civilizations. What's his beef? Well, he's declared war on creation itself, so not great. The SCP Foundation seems to think that any manifestation of evil is at the bidding of the Scarlet King. So a god as old as understanding, who's made it his sole purpose to end creation? I mean, it doesn't sound like a party I want to be at, does it? If you want to know about this SCP, we've got a video all about it on Life's Biggest Questions, basically the home of like all kinds of SCP content.
Starting off this countdown, we have SCP-1440. SCP-1440 is a man of unknown ethnicity or age. It was discovered over 50 years ago and has not aged a bit. The Foundation is currently trying to keep it away from civilians, but his current location is unknown. So it's said that prolonged exposure to this SCP can result in a series of effects. Long-term exposure results in death and destruction of mankind. One time when SCP-1440 was brought into a site for questioning, it ended with the deaths of multiple personnels and 6 SCP objects. Other attempts at containing it has caused other destructive events to happen. So the fate of humanity depends on this SCP being contained, but they can't do it without risking loss of resources and personnel. In our 9th spot, we have SCP-6789, otherwise known as my pal Siren Head. Here's the thing. The Foundation may have been able to successfully contain one Siren Head, but there are multiple still out there. Like, there's not just one Siren Head in the entire world. Now, when Siren Heads are caught, they are very hard to contain. So they have complex containment procedures, such as they have to be kept in a room with an anti-sound device. Like, obviously, or else personnel would just be tricked or killed by Siren Head sirens. But the Foundation has struggled to contain these creatures. In fact, they often end up escaping. They are very difficult and costly creatures to contain. The SCP lacks the appropriate measures to keep Siren Head properly contained. Moving on, number 8, we have SCP-2521. SCP-2521 is a large creature about twice the height of an average human. Its body is covered in black tendrils. Now, you need to be very careful with this SCP. Basically, nothing can be written or said about it. I say this as I'm currently talking about it. Basically, if you write about it, it will steal the paper on itself. If you speak about it, it will steal you. We currently don't know what it does with this information. As a result, everything about it needs to be written in pictograms. This SCP is impossible to contain since it can just pass through walls. Coming in at number 7, we have SCP-081. SCP-081 is a contagious virus that is spread by rats. If exposed to this SCP, you will be subjected to 4 different viral stages. Stage 1, you will just feel tired. Stage 2, you will experience hot flashes and have a bigger appetite. Stage 3, you will experience polyphagia, which is extreme hunger, and you will eat everything in your sight that's edible. During this stage, your metabolism will slow down and you will gain a huge amount of weight. During stage 4, you will reach 55% body fat, and once again, you will experience hot flashes. It will end with you combusting at a random time. Now, at first they believed that they had contained this viral SCP, but turns out that the virus can be spread by exposure to the victim's ashes. So while they thought that the virus was contained and under control, it was actually still spreading through the deceased victim's remains. Moving on to number 6, we have SCP-1155. This is a pretty tricky SCP to keep contained. So SCP-1155 manifests itself as street graffiti. The graffiti is typically of a humanoid creature with claws and a head of an owl. Those that see this SCP directly will be enticed by it. It will lure them in until they are standing close enough to the graffiti. Then the SCP will violently attack the person, slicing them and dismembering them. This will happen within 6 seconds, very fast, then you're just gone. The SCP has a habit of relocating every 7 days. Here's the thing, the SCP can be contained, but never permanently. Since it's in the form of street art, the only way to protect humans is to block off the art from view. But if this happens, then SCP-1155 can just relocate elsewhere. We are now at our 5th and halfway mark with SCP-1755. SCP-1755 is a series of worms that look like thin fibers. It latches onto anyone wearing anything made out of cotton. It will eat a thread of cotton and then reproduce more of itself, which is why it's vital to keep them away from clothing. It takes them about 2 weeks to turn an entire shirt into thousands of worm-type creatures. This is why it's so hard to contain. They reproduce so quickly and easily. Recently, there was an outbreak at a university. A lot of the clothes on students and teachers began to rot, meaning lots of new worm babies were made. In our 4th spot, we have SCP-1847. SCP-1847 is a humanoid that manifests itself as a Caucasian male in its mid-30s. It goes by the name William Whitward. It appears on airplanes going inbound to England. Basically, what will happen is it targets unmarried females between the ages of 27 to 34 years old. These women will be immediately attracted to him, tricking them into having intercourse with him. As soon as they finish, SCP-1847 will produce SCP-18471. And then they will murder the victim, always by impaling them through the heart. The victim's body will then disintegrate and get turned into an item of jewelry which they will take as a souvenir. Here's the thing, no matter how many times the Foundation captures this SCP, it still manages to escape, typically within 4 to 16 weeks of its capture. As of now, they have not come up with any methods to prevent this from happening. Coming in at number 3, we have SCP-1532. This is a pretty weird and disturbing SCP if you ask me. So SCP-1532 is a facility that artificially creates and sells humans. Yeah, what the heck? So basically it creates catalogs to advertise itself. It will place these into mailboxes all across the US and Canada. It basically advertises that you can create your own human. So the person can select a bunch of human traits and mail it back to the SCP with their form of payment. And basically they create that person for you and then ship it to you. Very disturbing. It's like an episode of Black Mirror. The Foundation currently does not know the whereabouts of this SCP or how the humans are made. Right now they're trying to prevent humans from becoming aware of this SCP's existence. In our 2nd spot, we have SCP-1048-A. What if I told you that this SCP was a teddy bear? Sounds cute and cuddly, right? Wrong. SCP-1048-A is a teddy bear made entirely out of human ears. Disgusting. Now, this SCP has escaped and is currently wandering around the facility somewhere. They believe that SCP-1048-A is in Site-24 somewhere, but still haven't been able to find it. So it may just be that it escaped the facility altogether. This SCP is capable of emitting a high-pitched shriek that will cause intense pain in the eyes and ears of everyone in a 10-meter radius of it. After being exposed to that, you will grow ear-like growths all over your body. It will completely cover your body in about 20 seconds. After you are completely covered in these ears, you will die from asphyxiation within 3 minutes. Yeah, that's not a friendly teddy bear at all. Let's hope that they catch it soon. And in our number 1 spot, we have SCP-4666, otherwise known as the Yule Man. SCP-4666 has been around for a number of years. It's described as a super tall, elderly, humanoid type man. He always appears completely naked, which that alone is terrifying. This SCP makes an appearance at night from December 21st or 22nd to January 1st or 2nd. During this time, he enters homes and terrorizes families. Isolated rural homes are its targets. Once inside, he will kill all members of the family except for one child, which he will take with him. In other cases, he will spare the families, and in the morning they will wake up to presents on their bed. But the presents are the remains of his victims. Currently, the whereabouts of the Yule Man are unknown, so just be extra cautious around the holidays.